I knew something was wrong before I even reached the dam. The shoreline looked different. At first, I blamed the heat. Then I blamed my memory. But when I climbed onto the observation deck overlooking my reservoir, my stomach dropped. The water level had fallen nearly 15 feet. 15 feet. This wasn't a drought. This wasn't evaporation. Someone was draining my reservoir. And standing beside one of the control valves was an HOA president, wearing a bright blue blazer, giving orders like she owned the place. She had no idea the reservoir she was emptying wasn't abandoned. It wasn't public. And it definitely wasn't hers. What happened over the next 6 months would end with one of the largest civil judgments our county had ever seen. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm a civil engineer and the managing owner of Brooks Water Resources, a family company founded by my grandfather nearly 60 years ago. Our biggest asset wasn't an office building. It wasn't heavy equipment. It wasn't even the thousands of acres we managed. It was Falcon Ridge Reservoir, a privately owned water storage reservoir built decades earlier under county permits and long-term water agreements. The reservoir supplied irrigation water to several farms, emergency wildfire reserves, and industrial customers during dry seasons. Replacing it today would cost well over $8 million, which explained why we protected it so carefully. Every valve, every pipeline, every access road, every control structure. The property was surrounded by fencing, warning signs, and monitored security systems. Most people never even realized it was privately owned, until someone decided the water looked wasted. 3 weeks earlier, I'd left for Colorado to supervise the final phase of another water infrastructure project. Everything at Falcon Ridge had been operating perfectly. Before leaving, I met with our operations manager, Luis. Anything unusual? Nothing. Security systems? All normal. Water levels? Right where they should be. Perfect. Or so we thought. The trouble started a week after I left. A luxury subdivision called Silver Creek Estates had recently expanded near the southern boundary of our property. Like many upscale developments, it had an active HOA. Its president was Karen Whitfield. Karen had strong opinions about almost everything. Grass height, mailbox colors, holiday decorations, parking rules, and apparently, water. According to neighbors, she frequently complained that the reservoir looked too full. She believed lowering the water level would expose more shoreline for recreation. The problem? It wasn't a recreational lake. It was an engineered water storage reservoir. Every inch of water served a purpose. Every operating level was carefully calculated. Karen either didn't understand that or didn't care. While I was away, she reportedly attended several HOA meetings insisting the unused water should be released. Several residents questioned whether the reservoir was private. She confidently claimed she'd looked into it. She hadn't. Instead, she'd confused an old county flood control map with an entirely different public basin located 20 miles away. That mistake would become spectacularly expensive. The first warning came from Luis. He noticed unusual flow readings leaving the southern discharge channel. He assumed an automatic valve had malfunctioned. Maintenance crews checked the computers. Everything looked normal. Then they discovered something impossible. The valves weren't malfunctioning. Someone had manually opened them. Luis immediately called me. No scheduled releases? None. Equipment failure? No. I frowned. Then who opened the gates? I don't know. By the time I booked the earliest flight home, water had already been flowing for nearly 2 days. When I reached Falcon Ridge the following afternoon, the situation looked even worse. The shoreline had receded dramatically. Boat access ramps sat high above the water. Normally submerged rocks were exposed. Large sections of shoreline had turned to mud. Maintenance crews rushed between control buildings. Engineers checked pressure readings. Everyone looked exhausted. Then I saw her, Karen Whitfield, standing beside the southern valve house with 3 HOA board members. She was smiling, actually smiling, as workers scrambled around her. I parked, climbed out, and walked straight toward the group. She looked at me with complete confidence. "Can I help you?" I stared at her. "You can start by telling me why you're standing beside my discharge valves." She laughed. "This reservoir belongs to the county." "No." "It absolutely does." "No." She folded her arms. "I verified it." "With who?" Silence. That wasn't encouraging. One of my engineers hurried over carrying a clipboard. "Daniel." "Status?" He glanced at Karen before answering. "We've lost millions of gallons." Karen interrupted. "It was necessary." Every person on my crew stopped working long enough to look at her. Necessary? I slowly turned. For what? The neighborhood wanted more shoreline. I honestly thought I'd misheard her. More shoreline? Families deserve access to the water. It's private. It should serve the community. It serves paying water customers. She shook her head. That's selfish. Luis quietly whispered, "Don't." He knew me well enough to recognize exactly how angry I was becoming. Instead of arguing further, I looked toward the valve controls. The security lock had been cut. Cut, not unlocked. Not opened with permission. Cut. Heavy-duty chain lying on the ground. Fresh bolt cutter marks. The protective control cabinet stood open. Someone had physically operated industrial water control equipment. Without authorization. Without engineers. Without permits. Without the slightest understanding of what they were doing. My operations supervisor handed me several printed reports. Flow records, pressure logs, security alerts. Everything was time-stamped. Then another employee approached holding something even more interesting. A security camera hard drive. We recovered the footage. Karen's smile faded, very slightly. I connected the drive to my laptop right there beside the valve house. The video began playing. Crystal clear. There was Karen, unlocking, or rather cutting, the chain. Standing beside contractors she'd apparently hired, watching while they forced open the valve controls, then applauding as water began rushing into the spill channel. The video had sound. Her voice couldn't have been clearer. "Open it farther." Nobody spoke. The only sound came from thousands of gallons of water continuing to pour out of the reservoir. Karen stared at the screen, then looked back at me. That doesn't prove anything. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. Because the footage proved everything. And what Karen still didn't know was that opening those valves had triggered far more than a property dispute. It had disrupted legally protected water deliveries to multiple agricultural customers. Customers with contracts. Customers with lawyers. Customers already demanding answers. She thought she'd created a better Lakeview. Instead, she had just opened the door to a legal disaster unlike anything our county had ever seen. For the next several hours, nobody left the control station. Every engineer, every maintenance supervisor, every operations manager, every technician, all focused on one objective: stop the water loss. Fortunately, the emergency shutdown system still worked. Within minutes, my crew manually closed the discharge valves. The roaring flow gradually slowed, then stopped. But the damage had already been done. Millions of gallons had been released. The shoreline had receded dramatically. Pressure throughout the irrigation system had fallen well below normal operating levels, and our phones hadn't stopped ringing. Farm managers, industrial customers, emergency water districts, everyone wanted the same answer. What happened? I wished I had a simple one. Instead, I pointed toward Karen, who was still standing beside the valve house, looking more confused than concerned. She seemed genuinely surprised that everyone wasn't thanking her. One of the HOA board members quietly stepped away from her. Then another. Within minutes, Karen was standing alone. That was probably the first sign she realized this wasn't going according to plan. I handed the recovered security drive to Luis. "Make 3 copies. Already started. Cloud backup? Uploading. Good." The footage was too important to risk losing. Every second mattered. It clearly showed Karen arriving with 2 contractors. One of them unloaded bolt cutters. Another carried a toolbox. The security cameras captured every angle. The chain being cut, the protective cabinet being forced open, Karen pointing toward the control wheel, the valves being turned, the water rushing into the spillway. And perhaps the most damaging part of all, Karen looking directly at the contractors and saying, "Keep opening it." Nobody had edited the recording. Nobody needed to. Reality was more than enough. Less than an hour later, the first county vehicle arrived. Then another. Soon the parking area filled with trucks from multiple departments: county water resources, environmental protection, public infrastructure, even the sheriff's office. Word had spread quickly, very quickly. A deputy walked over to me. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes. We understand unauthorized access occurred." I simply handed him the tablet. He watched nearly 5 minutes of footage, paused, looked toward Karen, then watched it again. His expression never changed. When the video ended, he quietly said, "I'll need a copy." "You'll have one." Meanwhile, county engineers began inspecting the valve structure. One of them examined the damaged locking mechanism. Another photographed the cut chain. A third checked the emergency controls. After nearly an hour of inspections, the senior engineer approached me. "Who operated these valves?" I pointed toward Karen. He stared for a second. "Does she have reservoir certification?" "No." "Engineering license?" "No." "Operator training?" "No." He slowly removed his glasses, then sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." Because everyone standing there understood one thing. Those weren't ordinary water valves. Each controlled enormous hydraulic pressure. Opening them improperly could have damaged gates, pipelines, downstream channels, and water delivery schedules. Karen hadn't simply opened a faucet. She had interfered with critical infrastructure. That distinction mattered a lot. By evening, our legal team had arrived. So had attorneys representing 2 agricultural cooperatives, 1 manufacturing facility, and an emergency wildfire water district. Each organization relied on scheduled water deliveries from Falcon Ridge Reservoir. Each had contracts. Each had experienced disruptions. Each wanted answers. Karen finally approached me. "I think this has gotten out of hand." I looked at her. "You think?" "I was trying to help. You cut security locks. I thought they were unnecessary. You operated industrial equipment. I didn't know." "Exactly." She frowned. "No one told me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So your plan was to change water infrastructure first and ask questions later?" She didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer. The following morning, specialists began calculating the actual impact. The numbers kept growing. Water replacement costs, emergency pumping, inspection expenses, environmental monitoring, system recalibration, customer compensation, temporary water purchases, engineering reviews. Every department submitted estimates. Every estimate increased the total. Then another issue surfaced. One of our environmental consultants called me aside. "Daniel, what is it?" He pointed toward the newly exposed shoreline. "See those areas?" I nodded. "Those wetlands are protected." My stomach tightened. Because rapidly lowering water levels had exposed sensitive habitat much earlier than seasonal operating plans allowed. Wildlife officers immediately began documenting conditions. Again, Karen hadn't intended any of this, but intent doesn't erase consequences, especially when critical infrastructure is involved. By the third day, media helicopters were flying overhead. News vans lined the entrance road. Reporters stood outside the security gate broadcasting live updates. The story spread far beyond our county. Private reservoir drained. Unauthorized valve operation under investigation. Water infrastructure dispute expands. Everyone wanted interviews. I declined. Evidence speaks better than headlines. Then came the biggest surprise. One of the contractors Karen hired contacted my attorney. Apparently, he wanted to cooperate. Completely. During a recorded interview, he explained exactly what happened. Karen had told him the reservoir belonged to the community. She claimed she had authorization. When he questioned the locks, she reportedly said, "They're old. We have permission." He believed her, until investigators contacted him. The contractor immediately turned over text messages, invoices, phone records, everything. Those messages became devastating evidence. One message from Karen read, "Bring heavy bolt cutters." Another, "We'll deal with paperwork later." Another simply said, "The neighborhood voted for this." Every message removed another possible defense. By the end of the week, the HOA itself held an emergency meeting. Attendance broke every previous record. Residents packed the clubhouse. People weren't discussing landscaping anymore. They wanted to know why their HOA president had become the center of a county-wide investigation. The HOA attorney summarized the situation: property ownership, reservoir permits, infrastructure damage, potential civil liability. The room grew quieter with every sentence. Finally, one homeowner stood. "I have one question." The attorney nodded. "Did the HOA ever own that reservoir?" "No." "Did we ever have permission?" "No." "Then why were we told we did?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Karen. She slowly stood. "I honestly believed," a resident interrupted. "Belief isn't ownership." Another spoke. "You never checked?" Another. "You cut locks?" Another. "You hired contractors?" The questions kept coming. Karen had fewer answers every minute. Then the HOA attorney quietly delivered the sentence that changed the entire meeting. "Based on current evidence, the association will not be defending these actions." Karen's face went completely pale, because she finally understood. She wasn't facing one lawsuit. She was facing several, and the security footage was only the beginning. The courtroom was now unavoidable, and once the judge saw the evidence, everything Karen owned would be at risk. The trial began 6 months later. By then, the story had spread across the state. Farmers followed it because water deliveries had been interrupted. Engineers followed it because critical infrastructure had been tampered with. HOA residents followed it because their former president was now sitting at the defendant's table. The courtroom was full before the judge even entered. Engineers, contractors, county officials, reporters, residents from Silver Creek Estates, even people with no connection to the case wanted to watch. Everyone knew one thing. This wasn't really about an HOA anymore. It was about someone taking control of infrastructure they had no right to touch. When the judge entered, the room became completely silent. Our legal team began with the facts. No dramatic speeches, no emotional arguments, just evidence. Certified property records established that Falcon Ridge Reservoir was privately owned. Operating permits showed that Brooks Water Resources was solely responsible for its management. Engineering documents explained the purpose of the reservoir. Water supply contracts confirmed scheduled deliveries to farms, industrial customers, and emergency agencies. Every document fit together perfectly. Then came the photographs: the cut security chain, the forced control cabinet, the lowered shoreline, the exposed boat ramps, the damaged wetlands, the interrupted irrigation channels. Each image told part of the story. Then the security footage was played. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen came to life. Karen appeared walking toward the valve house. The contractors followed behind her carrying tools. The video clearly showed bolt cutters slicing through the chain, the cabinet door swinging open, the control wheel turning, water exploding through the discharge channel. Then came the moment no one in the courtroom forgot. Karen's voice echoed through the speakers. "Open it farther." No one spoke after the video ended. The silence lasted several seconds. The judge simply looked down at his notes, then looked toward Karen. Her attorney stood. He argued that Karen believed the reservoir belonged to the community, that she had acted without malicious intent, that she simply misunderstood ownership. The judge listened carefully, then asked one question: Did your client verify ownership before cutting the lock? The attorney hesitated. No, Your Honor. Did she contact the county? No. Did she contact the owner? No. Did she possess any authority to operate the reservoir? No. The judge nodded once, then wrote something in his notebook. That exchange lasted less than a minute. But everyone in the courtroom understood its importance. Intent mattered, but so did responsibility. The trial continued with expert testimony. The county's chief hydraulic engineer explained exactly what the valves controlled. They regulate stored water, downstream flow, and delivery pressure. What happens if they're opened without authorization? Significant operational disruption. He described emergency shutdown procedures, pressure balancing, inspection requirements, mechanical stress. The explanation made one thing clear. Those valves weren't designed for public use. They weren't even designed for trained operators to adjust casually. Every movement required planning. Every release required documentation. Next came our environmental consultant. He explained how the sudden drop in water level affected protected shoreline habitat. Then agricultural representatives testified. Several farmers described delayed irrigation schedules. An industrial customer explained emergency water purchases. The wildfire district testified about contingency planning while reservoir storage was restored. One by one, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Then the contractor Karen had hired took the stand. He admitted bringing the bolt cutters. He admitted opening the cabinet. But he also explained why. She told us the reservoir belonged to the HOA. Did you believe her? Yes. Why? She spoke like someone with authority. He then identified text messages presented by the attorneys. One message read, "Bring heavy bolt cutters." Another read, "We'll deal with paperwork later." Another simply stated, "The neighborhood approved it." The courtroom remained silent. The contractor looked genuinely embarrassed. I never would have touched those controls if I'd known the truth. That testimony carried weight, because it showed how confidently misinformation had been presented. When Karen finally testified, she appeared exhausted. Months of investigations had clearly taken their toll. She admitted she never checked the deed, never contacted county engineers, never spoke to Brooks Water Resources, never verified who owned the infrastructure. She simply assumed and acted on that assumption. When asked why she believed she could lower the reservoir, she answered quietly, "I thought it would help the neighborhood." No one doubted she believed that. The problem was that belief isn't permission. After closing arguments, the judge recessed for several hours. When court resumed, every seat was filled. The judge carefully reviewed the findings. He emphasized several key points. The reservoir was unquestionably private property. Critical infrastructure had been intentionally accessed without authorization. Security measures had been deliberately defeated. The resulting actions caused widespread financial losses. The court also noted that multiple opportunities existed to verify ownership before taking action. None were used. Finally, the judge announced the ruling. Karen Whitfield was found liable for the damages resulting from her unauthorized actions. The court awarded compensation covering infrastructure repairs, emergency operations, environmental restoration, contractual losses, professional expenses, and additional legally recognized damages. The total judgment exceeded $12 million. The courtroom remained completely silent. Karen lowered her head. Several HOA residents looked stunned. Others simply stared ahead. No one celebrated. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was a reminder of how expensive a bad decision can become when someone ignores clear boundaries. In the months that followed, Falcon Ridge Reservoir returned to normal operations. Water levels recovered. The shoreline stabilized. Wildlife monitoring showed encouraging improvements. Every security system was upgraded. New electronic locks were installed. Additional cameras covered every access point. The county also worked with infrastructure owners throughout the region to improve security recommendations for similar facilities. Sometimes the biggest lessons extend far beyond one property. Silver Creek Estates changed too. The HOA elected an entirely new board. The new leadership focused on transparency. Before making decisions involving neighboring properties, they verified facts first. Several board members even visited me, not to argue, not to negotiate, to apologize. They admitted the community had relied on assumptions instead of documentation. I accepted the apology. Because good neighbors aren't people who never make mistakes. They're people who learn from them. Nearly a year after the trial, I stood once again on the observation deck overlooking Falcon Ridge Reservoir. The water reflected the evening sky exactly as it had before everything happened. The control house stood quietly beside the shoreline, locked, secure, operating exactly as designed. Luis joined me carrying 2 cups of coffee. He smiled toward the reservoir. "Looks normal again." I nodded. "Exactly the way I like it." He laughed. "You think people finally understand?" I looked across the water. "I think they understand one thing." "What's that?" "Never mistake confidence for authority. Because authority comes from facts, from ownership, from responsibility, not from assumptions." The reservoir had survived, the community had learned, and one decision made without permission became a lesson no one in the county would ever forget. Final message. Property rights aren't complicated. If something isn't yours, you don't get to control it simply because you think you know better. A single assumption can drain more than water. It can drain trust, reputations, and fortunes. Sometimes the most expensive mistake isn't breaking a lock. It's believing the rules don't apply to you. How would you like HOA stories? Please like, share, and subscribe my YouTube channel for more HOA interesting stories.